Hey guys! Let's see if you guys can see me. Alright, it's kind of funny to not be able to like hear you because I feel like I'm on Zoom right now. But like, if you guys can see me, then like say something in the chat. I don't know if you guys can see me or hear me or anything. Let's see. Okay, so we're ready to go, but let us see. Guys, say something in the chat. Otherwise, you're not here. All right, Pippa is here. Let's see. What about Sarah Beth? Come back, Sarah Beth. She left. And then Rochelle. Let's see. All right. One more minute and then I'll start. Hold on. This is kind of my fault for not starting right, but it's okay. Come back, Sarah Beth. Alright, you know what? Too bad for Sarah Beth, because I'm going to start. Even if Pippa's... Oh, 2 viewers. Okay, we're good. Alright, so... Yash, what's up? What's up? You're here for my lecture. Alright. Well, Yash is here, and maybe Sarah Beth will come back, so we'll start. Alright, so... This is going to be my version of a brief history of the Middle East. This should take about 20 minutes. Again, I'm probably going to miss something. I'm probably going to say something wrong, and that's okay. Things are complex, and that's just how things are. All right, let's start. So just a brief thing about the early history. You know, the Middle East, the greater Middle East, North Africa area was at times occupied by the Persians, the Romans. During the times of the Romans, you know, you had the rise of Christianity, but also, you know, the suppression of Christianity. You know, that's who executed Jesus, is the Romans. You have, it was ruled by the Islamic Caliphate, with down here on the bottom right, all of, you know, Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, Iraq, etc. were ruled by the Islamic Caliphate, etc. Hi, Kate. Welcome to the stream. And, of course, eventually the Ottoman Empire, which ruled not only the Middle East, but also, you know, of course, all Turkey and much of Eastern Europe. Basically, during World War I, the Ottomans were defeated. So the Ottomans controlled the vast majority of this area, you know, Turkey, much of the Russian Empire, and much of the Middle East. And so once the Ottomans were defeated in World War II, there was, for the first time, not an empire that controlled the vast majority of the Middle East in modern times. So basically, of course, generally the Arab population wanted the right to self-determination, but the British and the French, who had won the war, of course, in World War I, the British and the French said, how about no? So they drafted a secret treaty to partition the Middle East between themselves and with the Russians. So, of course, there's a lot of issues with that, right? If you want self-determination and to be, based on your ethnic groups and ethnic histories, instead of like colonization based on where the oil is, it's going to cause some problems. And to make that even worse, mandatory Palestine was created with the Balfour Declaration. Yeah, Yash, what's up? Can I wait for you? Can I wait for you? You can watch this later if you want. Can watch this later if you want, but I can wait a minute. What do Kate and Pippa think? Should we wait for Yash or not? I don't think we should wait for Yash because he's calling me Danny, and he knows I hate that. So I don't know if I'll wait for you. 2 minutes. You should already know this. Maybe you could learn it from Zed. Yeah, I'll wait for you. That's fine. 1 minute. Try to hurry up. Anyway, I'll keep talking, but I'll repeat it. So, no, wait. Let's see. Who is Jungkook shit? Yeah, Sarah Beth says, who is Jungkook shit? Who's Jungkook shit? Someone's on there like, who is this? Okay, I feel like this is Emma because of like the dash after Yash. Like Emma always does that, so it's got to be Emma. Yeah. Kate, I agree with you. Sarah Beth. I should become a Twitch streamer. Yeah, I don't know. I play boring games though. I mean, like I used to play like interesting games, but I don't play like I don't play like Val or like League or any like nerdy ass games. I don't know. It's also just hella weird to like talk to a camera. Like I feel like I should have had a Zoom. Like it's so weird to just like talk to a camera like this. It's like, what the hell? Let's make myself smaller. I'm too big here. Okay, we have 6 viewers. What? That's like half the team. So, no, I'm not gonna play. I never like COD that much. I don't know. I mean, like but that's also because I'm kind of bad. Like I'm hella bad. All right, I'm gonna start again, Yash. Can I start again? Bro says get on COD. We still don't know who's Jungkook shit. Is it Emma? Come on, tell me it's Emma. Victoria's joining? Okay. God, I have an audit. Oh, someone left. Now we have 5 viewers. Someone left. Don't leave me. We'll start again soon. All right, can I start, Yash? I'm gonna start. I don't really care about you. All right, I'm just going to briefly go over what I said while some people weren't here, which is just like a basic early history, right? At times, the Middle East has been generally ruled by large empires, the Persian Empire at first, the Roman and the Byzantine Empire, that's where Christianity rose, and Jesus was, crucified by the Romans, and Islam eventually rose with the Islamic Caliphate, developed lots of culture and science, as you may or may not have learned. Oh, Emma, it's not you? Okay, who is it? Who is it? I don't think it's Cindy. Who is it? I can't decide. Oh, maybe Crystal? I don't know. Maybe it's Crystal. I don't know. Yeah, I probably Crystal. Anyway, so you have the Islamic Caliphate, all right, and they developed lots of culture and science. You can see the Caliphate in the bottom right corner. Pippa, why am I kidding? You guys are distracting me, okay? Anyway, so in the bottom right corner you can see the Caliphate in the 9th century. And it extends all the way to Spain. Was once under Muslim rule, and all the way over to Afghanistan. And then you have the Ottoman Empire, which was the most recent. This is the Ottoman Empire at its greatest extent, and it lasted all the way up until World War One. So after World War One, the Ottomans were defeated, and so once the Ottomans were defeated, for once in a long time there wasn't a large empire controlling the region. So what you had is, generally you'd hope to have... This message is held for review, Emma. Basically, the Ottomans were defeated in World War One, as you should know from class. And instead of Arab self-determination, or rule for the people who lived there, this British and French divided it up between themselves and the Russians, based on where the oil and natural resources were. So you can see here that Russia was given to Armenia as part of the Russian Empire. Persia was left alone, and then Kuwait was given as an British rule. Iraq was supposed to be an Arab state under British protection. Palestine was supposed to be administered by all three, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And this was all supposed to be French rule. This is modern day part of Turkey, Syria, and a couple of other countries. So you also had the Balfour Declaration around this time and the emergence of Zionism. So basically, Britain and the UN declared a homeland for the Jewish people in Israel, which is here, of course, in Palestine, and it was supposed to be administered as, a UN state. But unfortunately, because the British and French were kind of meddling here and started many of the problems, it was sort of a betrayal of the Arab population, right? Because the British were meddling and disrupting things in an area that wasn't theirs, which, is kind of the historical origins of, and a lot of these states are still the same based on what has happened here, and it kind of created a lot of these conflicts. But let's continue to talk. So, who are the main state actors in the region, right? So the difference between a state actor is generally like a generally recognized country with a full state apparatus, as opposed to non-state actors like, whatever it is, whether it's terrorist groups, quasi-states, any group that's like organized and probably armed but doesn't actually have a country, land, government, etc. So you have Egypt, everyone knows Egypt, who also controls part of the Sinai Peninsula. You have Israel here. And then currently you have Gaza and the West Bank. We'll get to that later. You have Jordan and Lebanon surrounding Israel. And you also have Syria. You have Turkey, which of course is the border between Europe and Asia here and the Strait. You have Iran, Iraq. You have small nations like Kuwait and Qatar. You have the UAE, that's where Dubai is. You have Oman and Yemen down here. You also have some parts of the Middle East, North Africa region here when it comes to Sudan, and over here with Algeria, etc. So these are the general state actors, right? In terms of like more on them, it's hard to say because a lot of these actors have changed political parties and views over time. But I mean, generally in Saudi Arabia down here, you have Sunni Muslims as opposed to Iran has a large Shia population. We can talk about that later. And then, of course, Israel is, the homeland of the Jews, which was created under the Balfour Declaration. So what makes the Middle East very complicated is the presence of non-state actors, right? So, of course, the best-known non-state actor in the Middle East at the moment is ISIS, right? Is, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which are quasi-states trying to develop an Islamic state and also a terrorist group. You also have most of these groups are classified as terrorist groups because generally when you have non-state actors who are armed, they're going to be classified as terrorist groups. But you have, Hezbollah in Yemen, you have the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party who advocate for an independent, Marxist-Leninist Kurdish state. You have Hamas, who controls the Gaza Strip, and the Izdin al-Qassam brigades, who are the militant wing of Hamas. These will all come more into context later. And you have the Houthis in Yemen, and those we'll learn about later. But now we're going to start with the Arab-Israeli War starting in 1848. So in 1948, I mean. Basically, of course, after World War II, the British pulled out of mandatory Palestine somewhat, and there was civil war, right? Because you have lots of different actors in the region. You have, the Israelis who came in because of the Balfour Declaration as a supposed homeland, but there were people living there before, so of course a lot of conflict was created in terms of civil war. So in 1948 you have the Arab-Israeli War, which results in an Israeli victory. And that's an Arab war, so that means that Israel here was fighting against the Arab League, which included a lot of the Arab actors we were talking about before, Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and Sudan, and just general Palestinian organizations. So in the 1948 war, the Israelis won, and the UN came in and created the partition plan that you see here on the right. So this was in 1947, Israel controlled everything except the green areas. And then after the war, they controlled all the green and red areas. So they controlled all the blue and red areas, I should say. So at the end of the 1948 war, the Arab-Palestinian state had shrunk to just the green areas here, and Israel controlled the Golan Heights up here at the top, and they controlled much more of this southwest area, with the exception of the Gaza Strip, and they controlled much of the West Bank. This purple area here is Jerusalem, which was, I believe, at the time divided by the UN. In 1956, you had the Suez Crisis, which, of course, came down to oil. Basically, Egypt nationalized the Suez Canal over here, and that created lots of issues because, of course, the UK and France didn't really like Egypt nationalizing the Suez Canal and stopping their traffic from getting through, so they tried to intervene. And this was actually somewhat indicated as the fall of the British Empire and Britain as a major world power, because although they did succeed in getting the canal back open with military force, it was a huge political failure. The US actually threatened to intervene. Oh, yeah, she just came back? Fuck. Oh, okay. I don't really know what to tell you. Basically, we just talked about the state actors in the region. We talked about how Britain and France divided up the territories between themselves instead of taking into account the actual feelings of the people in the area. And we talked about some of the non-state actors like ISIS, of course, everyone knows, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, the PKK, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the Houthis in Yemen, and the Mujahideen, which we'll talk about later. But now we're talking about we talked about the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. Israel won, and they expanded in the map on the right. And then the Suez Crisis, Egypt tried to nationalize the Suez Canal, which is the main shipping route into the Mediterranean Sea. And Britain and France were not happy and tried to stop it from occurring. They went to war with Egypt. And although they won militarily and the canal reopened, it was a major political failure for Britain and France. The U.S. even threatened to, devalue their currency because they were against the UK intervening here, and it was a mess for them. But overall, the Suez Canal was reopened, and they got access to their oil and shipping again. For the 6 Day War. All right, Yash has returned, and he's good. Okay. So basically, let's see, where were we? So, yeah, so Israel invaded the Suez Canal, and actually captured the Sinai Peninsula, which you can see right here, which has been captured multiple times by Israel. So you can see that here. That's this huge part that's normally part of Egypt, but Israel has captured and occupied multiple times. Yeah, so the U.S. pressured into a ceasefire, and Egypt agreed to freedom of navigation in the region. Let's see. And then what happens is the Six-Day War. So the Six-Day War is a very influential conflict, even despite its length. Basically what happens is Jordan and Egypt, Israel's neighbors, sign a defense pact to defend each other. Israel's angry and invades, and they eventually win a ton of territory and a very clear victory. So this leads to Israel capturing the Sinai Peninsula down here, as well as continuing to march into the West Bank, capturing the Golan Heights up here, and basically massively expanding. But the Camp David Accords pull Israel back to the blue area where it is now. That's only with the U.S. help. And then you have the first and second intifadas, which are basically just like lower level Palestinian rebellions. Think throwing rocks, etc. And then Israel responds with military force. Again, we can go on forever with this, but we're going to move on to the Arab Cold War. Basically, the Arab Cold War was the kind of last engagement before the modern era we think of. Of course, during the actual Cold War in, the 70s, 60s, 70s. Basically, all the West and the Soviet were involved, and you can see here the different alignments of countries and of actors in the region. So, Libya's communist. Most of the Saudis are pro-Western, and then Iran has a shifting alignment because Russia tries to get involved, etc. But basically, this this leads to the decline of Pan-Arabism because there's a lot of rebellions, but generally there's not a consensus on creating an union or uniting all of the region into one state or very closely allied states. Instead, more extreme religious ideologies like Wahhabism rise, and we'll see that play out later. But basically, there's lots of turmoil. The Soviets and the pro-Western powers get involved. There's tons of revolutions in Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Algeria, Yemen, Sudan, Libya, and Jordan, and multiple other countries. So there's a lot of turmoil, but no very significant events that you need to know for a debate sense. Once in 1979, this is where things start to get important, and there starts to be larger events that you need to know. So during the Iranian Revolution, which is also known as the Islamic Revolution, you had the U.S.-supported Shah, Mohammad Pahlavi. I'm not sure if I know how to say his name. But he was U.S.-supported and generally more liberal, although he was still an authoritarian leader. But the youth overthrow him and install an anti-Western supreme leader, Khomeini, who's his son or grandson is in power now. And basically this was the Shia revival. So this was a Shia Islamic government, a theocracy, and this started it didn't start, but a year later the Iran-Iraq war started because Saddam Hussein invades Iran. And also when the Islamic Revolution happens, there's kind of a hostage and oil crisis because Iran has left the West. They've not released the Western diplomats, I think, who were there. And there's also an oil crisis because they start trying to shut off their oil. But this starts the Iran-Iraq war. So basically the major shift is that Iran shifts from a pro-Western, dictatorship to a Islamic anti-Western dictatorship. This is not the Iranian Revolution. This slide is mislabeled. This is the Iran-Iraq war. So it starts over a border dispute over oil-rich areas. Saddam Hussein's Iraq, the Baathists. The Baathists is like the Iraqi main political party that Saddam Hussein represents, and also Bashar al-Assad in Syria. But basically, they're Arab nationalist, and they're also supposedly communist, but also some very aggressive in the region. We'll see. But they invade Iran. At the end of the day, there's no territorial changes, but you have Iraq using chemical weapons, and this is the start of a string of major conflicts in the region involving Saddam Hussein, who's a very notable name for a reason. The UN eventually negotiates a ceasefire. Also, this is notable for the Iran-Contra affair because even though the U.S. was supposed to not be involved and not sell arms to either side, Reagan sells arms to Iran in order to fund Nicaraguan death squads. Basically just one of the many bad things he did, but that's not really important here. Continuing on, you have the Gulf War, which is 20 years later in 90, where Saddam Hussein's Iraq invades the small oil-rich country of Kuwait. The U.S. invades, in theory because they want to protect Kuwait, but in reality because they want to defend the oil that Kuwait has. They win, right? This is Desert Storm, you might have heard of. And this is H.W. Bush, not W. Bush. The U.S. wins, but the Baathists retain power, and it's a very uneven war, right? Only 300 U.S. and coalition soldiers are killed, whereas the Iraqis lose between 20,000 and 50,000. So that's another the second conflict involving Hussein in 10 years, and another that the U.S. gets involved in for supposed reasons that are not related to oil, but in reality are related to oil. So the Iraq War. This is probably the most important conflict you need to know, and something I'll probably go into in more detail later. But basically, this is post 9/11, right? So Al-Qaeda was active in the region before this, and they were supposedly in Iraq. At least that was the reasoning that Bush gave. This is W. Bush at this point. This is what the reasoning Bush gave, and post 9/11, he accused them of supporting terrorists, and he also had the false description that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and so that was the reason for invasion. So they invade, they bomb Iraq, they capture and execute Saddam Hussein and overthrow the Baathists. So after 20 years, Saddam Hussein is executed and the Baathists are thrown out in Iraq. But it's not the end of the story, right? And eventually, weapons of mass destruction are not found, and it was a false assumption that they were supporting terrorists. Anyway, it's not the end of the story, right? The U.S. wins. The U.S. eventually wins, but there is a continuing civil war between 2006 and 2008. The U.S. withdraws in 2011, and so the story doesn't end, right? The conflict continues. The withdrawal of U.S. troops created a power vacuum, which increased sectarianism in the region, which is basically just infighting between non-state actors. So ISIS rise in 2014, and they capture a bunch of cities, and this leads the U.S. to come back in 2014 again and support the Iraqi government who's struggling against ISIS. They eventually defeat them by the end of 2017. So basically from this, you can kind of see that what the U.S. did in Iraq and in the Gulf War generally didn't solve any of the problems that existed, right? All the way back in the Gulf War in 1980, right? We're trying to stop, this is in 1990, we're trying to stop Saddam Hussein because he's a war criminal and because he doesn't support the U.S., right? 10 years later, you have the Iraq War, which doesn't end until 2011. And even after 2011, you continue to have conflict. You have the Joint Task Force Against ISIS that doesn't end until 2017. And even then, you have issues in Afghanistan that I'm not even mentioning here. So clearly, U.S. intervention has had major issues, as I'm sure many people know. And we can get into kind of more the issues and how you can apply that to argumentation. Then you have two more recent conflicts in Syria and Yemen. So the Syrian civil war starts with the Arab Spring in 2011. There's lots of revolutions across the region, and you have protests against Bashar al-Assad, who's the other Ba'athist. There's Saddam Hussein and Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad is in Syria. He's, the dictator there. After the Arab Spring protests, Assad cracks down, and the reason the conflict grows is because multiple other non-state actors enter, and they're supported by the great powers. So you can see on this list here, on one side you have the government. This is Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian Arab Republic, the Baathists. They're supported by Iran and Russia. And so Russia's in this conflict. And then also Hezbollah, but that's not really as important. Then you have the Turks, who are in the north here, on the border. And the reason the Turks are there is because the Kurds are here, right? I'll talk about this after, but the Kurds are an ethnic group that doesn't have a state. And they occupy parts of Turkey, Iraq, and Syria, generally in this area. And that's the PKK, which is the Kurdistan Workers' Party. And they're the least bad group in this conflict, and so that's why the U.S. supports them, right? The U.S. supports them with CJTF OIR, which is the task force. They don't have that many troops there, just support. And then there's ISIS, right? ISIS generally doesn't have as much territory. It's just very small portions as of February 2021, but they were more involved in the conflict back in 2014. So generally, the Syrian government still controls most of the territory. The Kurdish forces control the area around where they are, and the Turks are fighting the Kurds closer to the border. And then you have some other forces involved as well. The other important conflict in the region is the Yemeni civil war. And this is even more relevant to a lot of what's going on right now. So generally, this is an example of both these conflicts. Not so much the Syrian civil war, but mostly the Yemeni civil war is an example of the Saudi versus Iran power struggle for hegemony in the Middle East, which I'll talk about after. So basically, you have the Supreme Political Council, which is the Houthis, right? So the Houthi rebels control this area, including Sana'a, the capital. And they're supported by Iran and North Korea and Bashar al-Assad. On the other side is the Saudi coalition, and that's supported by the U.S. And they're doing airstrikes. This is the main complaint, I think, that is used in debate against the coalition is that it's basically just doing a bunch of airstrikes against kind of the rebels, and there's a bunch of refugees trapped in both of these conflicts, and they're not really being let out by either side, especially here in Yemen, in Sana'a, where you basically have people starving because the Saudis are blocking any aid, and the Houthis aren't really interested in giving any aid either. Then you also have ISIS involved. So there's some southern groups here, but the main influence is the Houthis against Saudi Arabia. So that's kind of all the conflicts I wanted to cover. But afterwards, I just wanted I'll both answer questions, but also talk about some of the Saudi Saudi versus Iran. It's kind of a proxy conflict in the region, and that's that I wanted to talk about. Put questions in the chat, but I'm going to start talking about this because this is kind of what's going on right now and what governs a lot of the conflict at the moment. And I'll also talk about the general argumentation for the GPC topic. All right, so I'm waiting for people to put questions if they want to ask them. Basically, for the Iran-Saudi Arabia proxy conflict is basically the probably most influential powers here. And the reason it's important is because this involves the great powers, right? Because China's not involved. China doesn't really get involved in the Middle East. But Russia, this is basically Russia versus the U.S. So Iran is supported by Russia, and the Saudis are supported by generally most of the West. And so this reaches all the way from Somalia, to the Western Sahara and Morocco, to generally the Middle East, North Africa region. And so this is starting all the way from 1979 to now. And it's basically a bunch of proxies of Iran and Saudi Arabia against each other, supported by Russia and China. Well, actually, China supports Iran too. That's true. Against the U.S. So basically, the reason this is important is because it's one of the examples of kind of great power competition creating wars, right? You see it in the Yemen Civil War. That's why the Yemen Civil War is cited on a lot of debate topics, because it shows this sort of proxy conflict and these conflicts. So they're involved. This is in the Syrian Civil War. Syria is supported by Iran against the U.S. and Israel and the Free Syrian Army, which is the Kurds. The Syrian National Army is the Kurds. Are they? I'm not sure. And then you have the Yemeni Civil War, which is the Houthis against basically everybody else. And the Houthis are supported by Iran and Russia. So this is probably, I haven't read this whole Wikipedia article, but this is basically to sum up. All right. So if no one has any questions, what do you guys want me to talk about? What's confusing? What did I do a bad job of explaining? Because I'm sure I didn't explain that well. I'm sure I didn't explain everything. Oh yeah, and it's Shia versus Sunni, which is two sects of Islam. I'm confused. Are people behind in the stream? Or what? Because you guys are not You guys are not saying anything you want me to talk about. So either you guys are behind or I'm not sure exactly. Something I'll probably... Alright, so if you guys don't put comments in the next couple minutes, I'm going. Alright, so you guys don't have any questions, so I'm at the end of the stream. Well, you know what? It seems like 4 people are still watching, so I'm confused. 4 people are still watching, but you guys don't have any questions? Okay, there we go, Kate. Oh, I was gonna. Okay, thank you. See, thank you, because I completely missed the whole point, the most important point. Thanks for telling me that. Okay, so generally, this is how things generally work on the topic for debate, right? So for this GPC topic, right? Generally, it's a neg argument. So generally, it's a neg argument to say that the U.S. competing with the great powers, namely China and Russia, has created a lot of issues, right? So oftentimes on the app, they'll start with a definition that's basically about the U.S. having hedge, right? Because once you argue that GPC is just about U.S. having hedge, as opposed to the U.S. competing directly against Russia and China, just that the U.S. wants to control the regions of the world, which is a fair definition, right? And I'm sure you can find one, or just make the case that that makes sense. So once you prove that, then you can argue that the U.S. any U.S. intervention in the Middle East, especially the current ones against Russia and China, is an example of great power competition, and therefore claim all the harms that come from it. But you also need to be able to argue against it, right? You can also, in terms of what we hit, we haven't argued this on AF, we've only argued it on NEG. What we've hit that the great power competition causes these Middle East conflicts, and how we responded to it is just by saying the Middle East has been unstable not since the US intervened, but simply because of sectarian conflicts, because of what we talked about at the very beginning, which is just the British and French meddling. And so the British and French meddling leads to this sectarian conflict as opposed to U.S. intervention. Although, it's in reality, the truth is that it's U.S. intervention that causes these issues. That's the real reality truth. But if you want to argue it in terms of debate, you would probably say something about the fact that when the U.S. came in, there was terrorist activity, and when the U.S. left, Al-Qaeda and ISIS actually are not as active in the region. You can argue that even it took a while. I mean, it took many, many conflicts, right? It took many, many years and many, many deaths. But at the end of the day, I mean, what? ISIS is, but there's 2 wars going on. So you can kind of argue that it's not unique, because when the U.S. entered the region, when the U.S. entered the region before then, other countries' great power competition, Russia's already involved in the region. Even if the U.S. were to leave, Russia supports a bunch of militants who just continue fighting against other countries and supporting other sides. So, and same with China, same with North Korea, and same with just groups in the region. You can reduce it to just the fact that, yeah, the U.S. increased the amount of weapons in the region, but even if it wasn't for great power competition, the U.S. would still sell weapons, and U.S. companies would still be selling weapons that find their way to countries in the region. It's just important to know the history aspect, because you need to know what people are going to mention certain conflicts, especially top level teams, right? I got away with it even in the past because I didn't really know the conflicts. A lot of people confuse the Gulf War and a lot of people confuse the Iran-Iraq War with the Gulf War with the Iraq War, right? Because it's kind of confusing because it's just the names of the countries. But those are 3 separate conflicts. One which the U.S. wasn't involved in at all, and the other 2 that the U.S. was involved in. So, yeah. I'm happy to hear more questions. But it seems like you guys are watching behind, so I'll wait a little bit. Alright, Kate. Sounds good. Also, I'll do this survey. I'll do this later. Alright, so we still have 4 viewers, so I'll wait for you guys to, if you're good, say so or leave the stream. If you have more questions, ask them. Because I don't know who the viewers are. All right, sounds good. I'll wait one more minute. Ugh. Thanks, Kate. I don't know. I hope it was helpful. I don't. Yeah. I'm sure there's still lots of unanswered questions, but I tried. All right. I'm gonna end this stream. I'll probably redo this because I could have done better. All right.